Hello everyone. Have you ever found yourself lying next to your spouse, close enough to hear their breathing, and yet feeling oceans apart? It's a strange and unsettling thing, isn't it? How two people can share the same bed, the same life, maybe even the same dreams once, but somewhere along the way, the emotional current that used to connect you feels like it's quietly slipping away. Emotional connection is not about grand gestures. It's not about the vacations or the anniversaries. It's in the way you share a laugh over nothing, the comfort you feel in silence, the warmth of being truly seen. When that begins to fade, the relationship still looks the same from the outside, but inside something essential starts to unravel. And here's the thing most of us don't admit. Losing emotional connection doesn't usually happen overnight. It creeps in quietly, hidden behind routines, responsibilities, and the unspoken words we're too tired or too afraid to say. It shows up in the pauses that are just a little too long, in the conversations that don't go deeper than the grocery list, in the absence of tenderness where once it flowed freely. Today, I want us to talk about those signs, the subtle but powerful signals that tell you when your emotional bond with your partner is weakening. Not to scare you, but to invite awareness, because awareness is the first step to change. We've all been there. The days feel long, the tasks endless, and somewhere along the way, we stop really seeing each other. But have you noticed how the emotional distance often begins with something seemingly small? It's the little shifts, the moments you don't quite register at first. It's like a painting that starts to fade, little by little, until the colors are no longer as vivid as they once were. So what are the first signs? The first and perhaps most telling is when you realize you're not sharing anymore. Think back to when you first met. Remember how you couldn't wait to tell each other everything. The smallest details from your day, your hopes, your fears, your little victories. You were a team. Not just in the big things, but in the quiet moments too. You had your inside jokes, your shared memories, the language only the two of you understood. But now it's different. You're still sitting together, but the space between you is filled with silence. The "how was your day" turns into a passing glance, a perfunctory question. You've stopped sharing the little things, the annoyances at work, the funny thing that happened on the way to the store, the worries that keep you up at night. Maybe it's not that you don't care, but somehow that intimacy, that small talk that used to create a bridge between you is fading. Why does this happen? Often it's because you're both so wrapped up in your own worlds. Maybe life has just become so busy that the emotional connection takes a back seat. You're not fighting, you're not arguing, but you're no longer connecting in the ways that matter. The small talk, the exchanges of thoughts and feelings that once built a foundation for your bond has dwindled. You've drifted into a routine of coexisting rather than truly being with each other. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean your love has disappeared. Love is a living thing, and like all living things, it needs attention, it needs nurturing. When you stop sharing the day to day, when you stop letting each other into the little corners of your lives, that's when the bond starts to loosen. Let's talk about the second sign: you've stopped laughing together. There's something magical about laughter in a relationship. When you're truly connected to someone, you find joy in the simplest things. A shared joke, a funny look, a playful tease. These moments make up the glue of a relationship. It's one of those subtle, powerful things that reminds you why you're together. Laughter says, "I get you." It says, "We're in this together." But when the emotional distance starts to creep in, laughter becomes rare. You find yourselves just going through the motions, sitting in silence, or perhaps you laugh, but it feels a bit forced. The inside jokes, they've all but disappeared. It's not that you've suddenly become serious people. It's that the things that once brought you joy now feel distant. I often hear people say, "We don't even laugh the way we used to. We don't joke the same anymore." And that's a clue. Laughter isn't just about comedy. It's a reflection of emotional health. When you're emotionally connected, humor flows naturally. But when the emotional connection fades, so does your ability to be light with one another. Now, why does this happen? Life can sometimes rob us of our joy. Stress, work pressures, raising kids, or even just the day-to-day grind. You stop having fun because there's just no energy left to laugh. But it's also about being open to each other's humor, to that playful, spontaneous side that makes life feel lighter. When you're emotionally disconnected, you don't feel as comfortable being vulnerable enough to share a laugh. And without that, the emotional distance continues to grow. I want to share a little story here, something that often happens in the therapy room. Couples come in and they talk about their relationship as if it's a business partnership. The love is still there, but it's buried under a mountain of responsibilities. And then we start to work on finding small ways to reintroduce joy and playfulness. It's not about fixing big problems right away, but about reclaiming those small moments of connection. And that's when the laughter starts to come back. When you open up, when you give each other permission to be silly or playful, it becomes easier to laugh. But it takes effort, doesn't it? It's easy to forget the joy when you're overwhelmed with life. But remembering how to laugh together is an important step toward bringing the emotional connection back to life. So now that we've covered the first two signs, I want to shift gears and talk about something else you may not immediately recognize as a problem, but one that can be just as damaging. Physical touch has become scarce. You see, touch is one of the most profound ways we connect with one another. It's primal and it's powerful. It can be as simple as holding hands, a gentle touch on the shoulder, or brushing against each other as you pass by. It's easy to overlook how much touch plays a role in maintaining emotional intimacy, but when physical touch starts to disappear, that's a problem. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but we're still having sex. What's the issue? And yes, sex is an important part of the relationship, but it's not the only kind of touch that matters. The absence of non-sexual touch is a huge red flag. When you stop touching, you stop reassuring each other. That gentle hand on your back as you're cooking together, the small kisses on the cheek as you part ways for the day, the hug after a long day at work, they're small, but they're powerful. Without them, a relationship can start to feel emotionally barren. Why does this happen? Often life gets in the way. You've got children, careers, obligations, and sometimes physical touch becomes something that's saved for special moments or the bedroom, rather than being part of everyday life. But let me tell you, the absence of touch creates a void. It's the emotional equivalent of feeling lonely even though you're with someone. That physical distance will start to mirror emotional distance, and without even realizing it, you both begin to feel less connected. Now that we've talked about sharing, laughter, and touch, we can move forward to the next phase of this conversation. But before we do that, I want you to take a moment. Are you feeling any of these things? Are you seeing these signs in your own life? If so, you're not alone. This happens in so many relationships. And it's not about blaming anyone. It's about recognizing where things have drifted so you can begin to steer them back in the right direction. We've got so much more to explore, so let's keep this conversation going. We've already begun to uncover some of the quiet signs that indicate emotional disconnection. And now, as we continue, I want to delve into a few more subtle shifts that often happen when the bond starts to loosen. But let me first ask you something. Have you ever found yourself just going through the motions with your partner? You're physically there, yes, but emotionally, you feel like you're living parallel lives, not intersecting as much as you used to. This is often the next stage, the feeling that you're not growing together anymore. When we first meet someone, we're usually in awe of how much we can learn from each other. You're discovering each other's quirks, perspectives, and dreams. But over time, those things become less of a shared exploration and more like a personal journey you're on alone. When your partner's growth becomes invisible to you, when you stop noticing or encouraging each other's personal development, that's when the emotional distance can start to widen. Think about it. When was the last time you asked your partner about their dreams? Not the practical ones, but the deeper ones. Do you know what they're passionate about outside of the daily grind? When we stop fostering curiosity about each other, it's as though we're no longer learning about the person we're with. Instead, we start to assume we already know everything there is to know. This doesn't mean you need to have deep, profound conversations every day, but it's those small, consistent moments where you check in with each other's evolving thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. It's the curiosity that once made you excited to hear each other's opinions. Without this, the relationship may feel stagnant, and that can be one of the clearest signs of emotional disconnection. Now, let's move to the next point, the absence of meaningful conversations. You see, when emotional connection starts to fray, you notice that the conversations you have begin to feel more transactional. Did you pay the bills? Do you need anything from the store? Are we still on for dinner with my parents next weekend? Yes, these things need to be discussed, but they shouldn't be the only things you talk about. If these practicalities are the only interactions that fill your days, it's easy for the emotional connection to slip away unnoticed. Meaningful conversations, the ones that give us a deeper understanding of each other, start to dry up. You used to talk about your hopes, your worries, your dreams for the future, the kind of life you wanted to create together. You'd share your thoughts about books, movies, or ideas that challenged your perspectives. But now, the conversation has become a checklist. And over time, that lack of deeper connection can feel like a weight, a subtle loss that builds up but is rarely addressed. It's not about blaming anyone. It's simply that life tends to sweep us into its rhythm. We're busy with work, the kids, the house, and before we know it, we're just crossing things off the list instead of exploring each other's hearts and minds. But it's in these meaningful conversations that the emotional intimacy thrives. Let's talk about emotional responsiveness, or rather, the lack of it. Have you ever shared something vulnerable, maybe a worry or a fear, and your partner didn't respond the way you hoped? Perhaps they didn't even notice the shift in your voice, the way your shoulders slumped when you spoke, or the sadness behind your eyes. In those moments, it can feel as though your emotional needs aren't being seen or valued. And when this becomes a recurring theme, it can have devastating effects on the emotional connection. You're opening yourself up, exposing parts of your heart, and your partner's response is nothing, or maybe they dismiss it. Oh, you'll be fine, or stop overthinking things. What happens then is a slow erosion of trust and safety. You begin to feel like your emotions don't matter. And that, my friends, is a dangerous feeling to have in a relationship. But why does this happen? There are a few reasons, and often it's about emotional exhaustion. We become so caught up in our own world, in our own struggles, that we forget to be there for each other in the way we once were. But this kind of emotional neglect, even if unintentional, is like the slow fading of color in a painting. It's hard to notice at first, but eventually, you realize the canvas has turned pale and the vibrancy is gone. When we're emotionally responsive to one another, it doesn't mean that we always have the perfect thing to say, but it does mean we're paying attention. We're noticing when our partner's mood shifts, when something's off, when they need to lean on us. And that attentiveness is a huge part of emotional intimacy. So, now we've touched on some critical signs: lack of growth, the loss of meaningful conversations, and emotional unresponsiveness. These aren't easy things to admit, especially when they're happening in our own relationships. But the truth is, acknowledging them is the first step toward healing. I want to take a moment to remind you that relationships take work, constant, daily work. And the work isn't about fixing the other person. It's about coming together and finding new ways to reconnect. It's about seeing and hearing each other again, learning about each other, and being responsive to each other's emotional needs. Now that we've laid this foundation, let's move to the next part of this conversation. We've discussed some key shifts that may signal emotional disconnection, but there's more to uncover. I invite you to stay with me as we go deeper into the next signs. Now that we've explored some of the key signs of emotional disconnection, it's time to dive deeper into the next set of clues. Those more subtle shifts that often fly under the radar. They're the kinds of things that, when you look back, you realize were there all along, but you just didn't have the language or awareness to identify them. They're the signs that something's amiss, even if everything looks fine on the surface. Let's talk about emotional distance during conflict. When you're emotionally connected to your partner, conflict is difficult but manageable. You may disagree, but you know that at the end of the day, you're still on the same team. You're both working toward a resolution, toward understanding each other. But when the emotional connection starts to fray, conflict becomes a battlefield, and in that space, it's easy to lose sight of each other. One of the most telling signs is the way you argue, or rather, the lack of connection in your arguments. Have you ever had a disagreement where, instead of coming together to find common ground, you felt more distant than ever? You may find that you're no longer listening to each other, or worse, you're both just waiting for the other person to finish talking so you can say your piece. It's not about trying to understand, it's about winning. In these moments, it's like you're no longer having a conversation. You're simply going through the motions of conflict without any real effort to reconnect afterward. Emotional distance during conflict is a sign that you're no longer hearing each other, no longer trying to understand each other's emotional world. You may even start to feel like the other person's emotional needs don't matter as much as your own. And when that happens, the connection begins to weaken. The truth is, conflict can actually be an opportunity for growth in a relationship. It can bring you closer if you approach it with empathy and vulnerability. But when that emotional bond has already started to unravel, conflict becomes just another way to push each other farther apart. Next, let's turn our attention to physical and emotional exhaustion. This one is tricky because we all experience exhaustion in different ways. Sometimes it's the physical exhaustion that wears us down, working long hours, taking care of the kids, handling endless responsibilities. But sometimes it's the emotional exhaustion that takes its toll. And when you're emotionally exhausted, it's incredibly difficult to stay emotionally connected to anyone, let alone your partner. The signs of emotional exhaustion can be sneaky. You might start to feel like you're just going through the motions in your relationship. You're still there physically, but emotionally, you're checked out. You might notice that you don't have the energy to listen to your partner, or you're too tired to show affection. When emotional exhaustion sets in, you may start to feel like your relationship is another task to manage instead of a source of joy, support, and connection. The irony is that when we're emotionally exhausted, we often pull away from the very thing that could help us feel better, our partner. When we stop leaning on each other, the emotional distance grows. And before we know it, that exhaustion, both emotional and physical, becomes a barrier between us. But why does this happen? Often it's because we fail to prioritize recovery in our relationships. We expect too much of ourselves and our partners without realizing that we need time to recharge. Relationships thrive when both partners are able to give and receive emotionally, but that's impossible when you're depleted. The key here is self-care, and I'm not just talking about the occasional bubble bath or day off. True self-care involves recognizing when you're emotionally drained and being honest about it with your partner. It's about knowing when you need a break, when you need to ask for help, and when you need to reconnect with yourself before you can reconnect with the one you love. Now, let's talk about a lack of shared experiences, or the absence of activities that bring you closer. In the early days of a relationship, you share experiences constantly. You travel together, take up new hobbies, or simply go for walks where you talk about everything and nothing. These shared moments are the emotional threads that tie you together, forming memories that bind you in ways words often can't. But when the emotional connection fades, those experiences become fewer and farther between. It's easy to get caught in the routine of life, work, responsibilities, obligations. But when you stop creating new memories together, you stop building the emotional foundation that keeps you connected. You may find that your partner's world is no longer as interesting to you as it once was. You may even start to feel like you're living separate lives. Why does this happen? It's a side effect of emotional distance. When you stop sharing experiences, you stop sharing life. But here's the thing, creating shared experiences doesn't have to be something extraordinary. It doesn't need to be a grand vacation or a major life event. It can be something as simple as trying a new restaurant, taking a dance class together, or even watching a documentary and discussing it afterward. The point is to introduce new things that both of you can enjoy and reflect on together. Remember, the key to emotional connection is not just in the deep conversations. It's also in the shared moments, the experiences that add texture and depth to your relationship. These moments bring you closer, even when life gets busy. Without them, the connection can start to feel one-sided, like you're both merely passing through life together, rather than actively living it together. Now, we've covered some big signs: the emotional distance in conflict, the exhaustion that sets in, and the absence of shared experiences. All of these are powerful indicators that something deeper is shifting between you and your partner. But there's still more to explore. These signs may seem small, but together they add up. Stay with me because we're just getting started. The next phase of this journey is where we start to see the more hidden, often unspoken aspects of emotional disconnection. And trust me, these are the ones that often hurt the most because they go unnoticed until it's almost too late. We've now talked about several of the subtle signs that can signal a fading emotional connection, how the little moments of intimacy start to slip away, how the conversations become more functional than meaningful, and how exhaustion can slowly erode the emotional closeness between you and your partner. But today, let's explore the more hidden signs. These are often the ones we miss because they're quiet, almost imperceptible, but they're no less powerful in their impact. Let's start with emotional unavailability. It's one of those signs that often appears in small, almost imperceptible ways. You're not necessarily fighting, but you're also not emotionally present. Your partner becomes more like a roommate than a lover, and you find yourself retreating emotionally, bit by bit. Maybe you stop sharing how you're really feeling because you're afraid of being vulnerable, or because you don't feel heard anyway. Maybe you notice that your partner's responses have become more distant, more indifferent. They seem to be there, but not really. Emotional unavailability can be a defense mechanism. If you've been hurt before, or if you felt dismissed or misunderstood, your instinct might be to retreat emotionally. But when both partners become emotionally unavailable, it's like building a wall between each other. The more you both retreat, the more distant you become. And before you know it, you're not even sure what drew you together in the first place. But here's the thing, it's not always about big, dramatic events. Emotional unavailability often creeps in slowly, like an undercurrent that grows stronger over time. You might not notice it until one day you look around and realize that you've become emotionally disconnected from the person who once meant everything to you. And when both partners are emotionally unavailable, it creates a cycle where no one is truly reaching out to reconnect, and the emotional distance grows. Let's move on to another, even more insidious sign: lack of empathy. Think about the last time your partner shared something deeply personal or emotional. What was your reaction? Did you listen with care? Did you feel their pain or joy with them? Or were you distracted, offering a quick solution, or worse, dismissing their feelings? When the emotional connection starts to fade, empathy is one of the first things to go. You start to lose the ability to understand and feel for your partner's emotional world. Instead of being a sounding board, a safe place for your partner to express themselves, you begin to respond with judgment or indifference. This is a dangerous path because empathy is the lifeblood of emotional intimacy. Without it, the relationship becomes transactional, a series of check-ins, to-dos, and obligations instead of a space for mutual emotional growth and understanding. Why does this happen? Sometimes it's because we're so caught up in our own emotional struggles, we forget to show up for our partner. Sometimes it's because we don't know how to respond when things get hard. And sometimes it's because we've simply stopped caring in the way we once did. But whatever the cause, the effect is the same. The emotional connection starts to unravel, and the relationship becomes a shadow of what it once was. The absence of empathy also shows up in the form of emotional withdrawal, not just in terms of not sharing your feelings, but in withdrawing support when your partner needs it most. Have you ever noticed how In times of stress or emotional turmoil, your partner may seem to pull away just when you need them most. Or maybe it's you who feels the urge to withdraw, retreat into yourself, and avoid sharing the heaviness you're carrying. When we're emotionally connected, we know instinctively how to be there for each other. We provide comfort, support, and a sense of safety. But when that emotional bond fades, we begin to feel like we're in it alone. Instead of being a source of support for one another, we become isolated, holding on to our pain and confusion. Emotional withdrawal is one of the clearest signs that the emotional connection has started to fade, because it's a direct rejection of the closeness and support that once existed in your relationship. Here's the hard truth: the longer emotional withdrawal goes unchecked, the harder it becomes to bridge the gap. When both partners are emotionally withdrawn, the relationship begins to feel more like a partnership of convenience than a deeply connected bond. Finally, let's talk about the loss of physical affection outside of sex. Now, we've already touched on physical touch, but let's look at it from a different angle. Sex is important. It's a form of physical affection, of course, but when physical affection starts to dwindle, it's not just about a lack of intimacy in the bedroom. It's about the absence of those small, tender gestures that we often take for granted. A hand on the small of the back as you walk by, a soft touch on the arm when you're watching a movie, a kiss on the forehead before bed. These are the little moments that, when they fade, can make a huge impact on the emotional connection you share. This kind of physical affection is different from the need to have sex kind of affection. It's about the emotional warmth that physical touch brings, the feeling of being seen, being cared for. It's about showing love and affection in small, everyday ways without the pressure of sex or performance. When physical affection starts to disappear, it's a sign that the emotional connection has already begun to erode. You stop holding hands when you go out. You stop hugging each other when you get home. You stop kissing each other for no reason at all. And while sex may still be happening, it's no longer the tender, loving act it used to be. It becomes more about duty or obligation rather than a mutual expression of closeness and desire. So, why does this happen? Again, life gets in the way. You get busy, you get tired, you get complacent. But even a small act of affection, like touching each other on the arm or sitting close to each other while watching TV, can reignite that spark of connection. Now that we've discussed emotional unavailability, lack of empathy, emotional withdrawal, and the absence of affection, we can see that the signs are often subtle, but they add up over time. It's easy to miss these shifts when they happen slowly, day by day. But once we recognize them, we have the opportunity to make a change together. As we move to the final part of our conversation, I want to leave you with this: recognizing these signs is not about guilt, blame, or fear. It's about understanding that relationships go through phases, and sometimes we just need to step back and reconnect. It's about creating a moment of awareness, a moment where we say, I see this, and I want to do something about it. And the first step is always the hardest: recognition. We've now explored some of the most telling signs that emotional disconnection has crept into your relationship: the lack of meaningful conversations, the emotional withdrawal, the absence of empathy, and the fading of affection. These signs, subtle as they may be, are the markers of a deeper issue. And acknowledging them is the first step toward restoring the intimacy and connection that may have slowly slipped away. But the question now is, how do we move forward? The first thing I want you to remember is that rebuilding emotional connection is possible. It's not about overnight transformation. It's about taking small, deliberate steps toward change. You can't fix years of emotional drift in a day, but you can take meaningful actions each day to heal the relationship. Let's begin with reigniting communication. One of the easiest, yet most powerful, ways to rebuild intimacy is by reconnecting through honest, open conversations. Not just the "how was your day" or "what's for dinner," but the conversations that dig deeper. You need to start asking each other those questions that once came naturally. What's been on your mind lately? When did you last feel really happy? What made you feel that way? What do you dream about now? It might feel a little awkward at first, like you're relearning how to speak the same language. But trust me, this is where it all starts. Reconnect emotionally by allowing yourself to be vulnerable with each other. Let down your guard. Share the little things, the things that made you laugh or the things that made you anxious. This doesn't mean you have to have profound, life-altering conversations every day, but it does mean you need to start sharing your world again. Small acts of emotional openness can begin to close the gap. And here's the thing: your partner is craving the same thing. They want to feel heard. They want to feel seen. So create that space for each other. Next, let's talk about reintroducing physical touch, but not just the kind that's related to sex. This is about reintroducing the tender gestures that show affection and care. When you hug each other, do it with intention. When you kiss, let it linger for a moment longer. Hold hands when you're walking together. These simple acts can have a profound effect on emotional connection. You may be wondering, how do you reignite this touch when it's already faded so much? Start small. A gentle hand on the back, a touch on the arm while sitting next to each other. These are simple gestures that don't require a lot of time, but they communicate volumes. Over time, these small moments of physical affection will create a sense of closeness and tenderness that has been missing. But physical touch is also about emotional responsiveness. It's about paying attention to each other's emotional needs. When your partner shares something vulnerable, respond with empathy. When they express a fear or a joy, meet them with your heart, not just your words. When you tune into each other's emotional worlds, you start to rebuild the trust and safety that are the foundations of any strong relationship. This brings me to the next step, reintroducing shared experiences. It's not just about the big trips or the major life events. Shared experiences can be small things, sitting down to cook a meal together, watching a documentary and talking about it afterward, or even simply taking a walk. The key here is to begin creating memories again. These shared moments are what will re-establish the emotional intimacy you've been missing. Start by doing something new together. It doesn't matter if it's a hobby, a small trip, or even a new series to watch together. The point is to break the routine and reintroduce joy and discovery back into your relationship. This can reignite that spark of connection that might have gone dim over time. Give each other space too. Reconnecting emotionally doesn't mean constantly being in each other's face. It means respecting each other's personal growth while still nurturing your relationship. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for your relationship is to give your partner the time and space they need to grow as an individual while still maintaining emotional closeness. The next critical step in rebuilding your emotional connection is addressing unresolved conflicts. If you've been letting things simmer beneath the surface, now is the time to address them. Conflict isn't always a bad thing. It's a sign that there's something important that needs to be heard. But it's the way you handle conflict that matters. It's about learning to argue in a way that brings you closer, rather than driving you further apart. It's about listening actively and responding with empathy, not just defending your position. If there are wounds that haven't healed, take the time to heal them. Apologize if necessary. Offer forgiveness if you haven't already. When you do this, you create a safe space for emotional intimacy to grow again. Conflict resolution done the right way can deepen your emotional connection instead of weakening it. Finally, I want to leave you with this. Be patient with yourselves and each other. Rebuilding emotional connection doesn't happen overnight. It's a process and it takes time. But with consistent effort, with small daily actions of affection, communication and understanding, you can restore the emotional intimacy that you may have thought was lost. Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about progress. It's about making the choice day by day to reconnect. So, if you're noticing any of the signs we've discussed, don't panic. Don't assume that this is the end. It's simply a signal, an invitation to return to each other, to rediscover what drew you together in the first place. The emotional bond can be rebuilt, stronger than before. It's about acknowledging that you've lost your way for a while, and now it's time to find your way back. So, take that first step. Reach out, talk, listen, touch, and share. The journey may not be easy, but it's worth it. And most importantly, you're not alone in this. Every relationship goes through these phases. What matters is how you respond when you notice the signs. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey today. Relationships require ongoing care, but when you choose to invest in them, they can become the greatest source of fulfillment and joy in your life. So, here's to reconnecting with your partner, to rediscovering love, and to living your most emotionally connected life together. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into emotional disconnection and reconnection. Thank you for staying with me through this exploration. If you found this video helpful, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might benefit from this conversation. Here's to a more connected, fulfilled relationship.